You're just a little too traditional for where we're headed. We need someone who can bring fresh ideas to the table. My name is Thomas Hartley. I'm 64 years old, and until this morning I was the Chief Operating Officer at Sterling Industries for 18 years. I joined when we were a small regional player with a handful of factories in Detroit. Now we're a global conglomerate with 25 plants across 3 continents. I help steer us through economic downturns, labor disputes, and more regulatory challenges than I care to remember. I'm not flashy. I don't charm clients at corporate galas, but the operations were always smooth. The production lines were always efficient, and we never missed a delivery deadline on my watch. Then Alexander Kane arrived, 38 years old with his tailored suits and trendy haircut. The board brought him in as CEO 4 months ago, and he swept through our offices like a hurricane, talking about agility and innovation and redefining goals. I knew what was coming the moment he scheduled our first one-on-one meeting. "The industry's evolving, Thomas," he said today, leaning back in my chair, with his feet propped on my desk. "We need someone who speaks the language of modern operations." I said nothing, just nodded once and offered a tight-lipped handshake. "We're bringing in Lucas Miller, 31, a rising star with a PhD in industrial engineering, who just gave a keynote speech on operational efficiency that's gone viral online." "I see," I said, my voice steady. "When's the transition?" Alexander smiled, surprised by my calm. 2 weeks, we'll announce it at the next board meeting." I packed my personal items that afternoon, while everyone was in an all-hands meeting about our exciting new direction. 18 years in this office, and everything fit in a single cardboard box. Family photos, a commemorative plaque from our first international expansion, the engraved pen my wife Margaret gave me before she passed. On my way out, I noticed Emily from logistics holding back tears by the elevator. She'd been with me since day one. "Don't worry," I told her. "It's all part of the cycle." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the last 7 months quietly documenting a series of questionable decisions that started appearing in our operations shortly after Alexander arrived, and grew more frequent after he mentioned bringing in his operations guru, Lucas. I wasn't planning revenge. I was just doing my job, keeping the operations clean, even on my way out. I grew up working in my uncle's auto shop in Ann Arbor, just outside of Detroit. He taught me that efficiency doesn't mean cutting corners, even when people do. I put myself through college fixing cars and managing his books at night. When I graduated, I turned down bigger offers to stay local, working my way up through regional companies, until Sterling's founder, Edward Graham, called me personally in "I need someone who can keep us running smoothly through this recession," he said. "Someone who sleeps better when the lines are humming." For 12 years, Edward and I built Sterling into something solid. When he retired, the transition was smooth. The new CEO, Victoria Lee, respected the systems we'd created. We disagreed sometimes, but she listened. We grew steadily, no flashy moves, just solid business practices and clean operations. Then Victoria retired, and the board wanted fresh energy. Enter Alexander Kane, with his Ivy League MBA, and stint at a tech startup that had more hype than substance. The first red flag appeared during his 3rd week. He bypassed our procurement protocols to hire a supply chain consultant, his former colleague, at 5 times our standard rate. When I questioned it, he smiled. "We're thinking bigger now, Thomas. The old constraints don't apply." The second flag came when he restructured our reporting lines, so operations went through his new chief innovation officer before reaching him. The third was overhearing him tell someone on the phone that our operations had a lot of outdated practices that needed creative solutions. I started watching more closely. Small irregularities appeared. Supplier contracts with companies I couldn't properly vet, consultancy fees without deliverables, budget reallocations without department head signatures. My team noticed too. James from internal audit stopped by one evening as I was reviewing the quarterly reports. "Something's off with the new equipment maintenance tracking," he said quietly. "Numbers don't match from entry to report." "Document everything," I told him. "Just keep it factual." Margaret would have told me to make waves, stand up in a board meeting, go out with a bang, but a heart attack took her 5 years ago, and without her fire, I'd grown more methodical, more patient, so instead of confrontation, I kept detailed records, downloaded suspicious transactions, cross-referenced irregularities, all while maintaining the same calm demeanor in meetings, even as Alexander brought in more of his people and pushed out mine. I wasn't being paranoid. The patterns were too consistent. Something bigger was happening. and it centered around this new operations wunderkind, Lucas Miller. My final board meeting lasted exactly 25 minutes. There was no mention of my 18 years of service, no thank you speech, no plaque or watch. Just a line on the agenda that read COO Transition Update. Alexander spoke about exciting new operational directions while I sat silently at the far end of the table. The chairman, Robert Stevens, couldn't quite meet my eyes. He'd been on the board when Edward hired me. Now he simply nodded along with Alexander's presentation about how Lucas Miller would revolutionize our approach to operational efficiency. I'd hoped for at least some acknowledgement from Robert, some recognition of what we'd built together. Instead, the meeting moved briskly to the next agenda item, the new distribution center Alexander wanted to build in Europe. As everyone filed out, Robert paused briefly by my chair. "You've been an asset, Thomas," he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder. "Best of luck." An asset. Like a piece of machinery that had depreciated. I walked back to my office, Lucas's office now, to collect my box. Through the glass wall, I could see Alexander showing him around, pointing at the charts on my walls like they were ancient hieroglyphs. Emily was waiting by my door, holding an envelope. "The logistics department took up a collection," she said, "for a proper send-off dinner." I thanked her, knowing I wouldn't use it. As she turned to leave, I asked Emily, "When did those invoices from Apex Logistics start coming in?" She thought for a moment. "March, I think, right after Mr. Kane announced the Operational Excellence Initiative." March, 3 weeks before Alexander first mentioned bringing in Lucas. That night at home, I spread all my documentation across my dining room table. 7 months of suspicious transactions. Invoices for services never rendered. Foreign consulting fees, without tax documentation. And most telling, shell suppliers that all traced back to a holding company called Peak Innovations, which had been registered just 4 days before Alexander was announced as CEO. The pattern was clear now. Alexander hadn't brought in Lucas because I was old school. He'd brought him in because they had a system, siphoning company funds through fake suppliers and consultants, hiding it in complex operational excellence costs that were hard to question in today's business environment. They needed me gone because I asked too many questions, kept too close an eye on the details. I sat back in my chair, looking at the evidence laid out before me. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something beyond the numb routine of daily existence. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, more focused. I opened my laptop and began organizing everything methodically. Cross-references, timelines, account trails. I wasn't going to confront Alexander. I wasn't going to call an emergency board meeting or go to the press. That wasn't my style. No, I would do what I'd always done. Let the numbers tell the story. But this time I'd make sure the right people were listening when they spoke. A week after my departure, I decided to reach out to Robert Stevens directly. Despite his lukewarm goodbye, he'd always been fair. He deserved a chance to address this before it got worse. I called his office and left a message with his assistant. Just wanted to discuss some operational concerns from my final weeks. Nothing urgent, but worth reviewing. He called back the next day, his voice guarded. "Thomas, good to hear from you. Alexander mentioned you might reach out." My stomach tightened. "Did he?" "Yes. He said you were having trouble transitioning. Said you had some concerns about our new systems that Lucas already addressed." "Robert, there are irregularities that predate Lucas's arrival. Significant ones." Silence on the line. Then, "Look, Thomas, I understand this is difficult. 18 years is a long time, but the board has full confidence in Alexander's vision, and Lucas has already streamlined several processes you flagged as problematic. That's not I'm afraid I have another call. Perhaps we can catch up at the holiday party. I hear you're still on the invite list." Very generous of Alexander. Considering. Considering what? I wanted to ask, but Robert had already hung up. The next morning, I received an email from Sterling's legal department. The language was carefully neutral, but the message was clear. Any accusations of operational impropriety without substantial evidence could be considered defamatory. They kindly reminded me of my confidentiality agreement. They were closing ranks. Someone, Alexander obviously, had anticipated I might notice the discrepancies, and had already poisoned the well. I decided to try another approach. James from Internal Audit had been on my team for 9 years. If anyone else had noticed problems, it would be him. We met at a cafe far from the office. James looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder. "They promoted me," he said before I could even ask about the accounts. "New title, big raise." I'm now reporting directly to Lucas. Congratulations, I said, keeping my tone even. How's that working out? James stared at his coffee. They've changed all the internal reporting systems. New software, new protocols. Lucas says it's more efficient. And is it? He looked up, his expression strained. Thomas, why can't they have me sign additional NDAs? They're watching everyone who worked closely with you. I see. They're saying things, Thomas, about why you left. What things? James lowered his voice. That you were resistant to necessary changes. That you made mistakes in the last quarters reporting that Lucas caught. Some people are even saying there were ethical concerns. My hands gripped my coffee mug, so hard I thought it might break. They weren't just pushing me out. They were destroying my reputation to cover their tracks. I should go, James said, throwing cash on the table. I've got a mortgage and kids starting college next year. I can't. It's all right, I said, forcing a smile. Take care of your family, James. As he hurried out, I sat alone, processing what I'd learned. My options were dwindling. The board wouldn't listen. My former team was either bored off or scared silent, and now they were attacking my reputation, making it nearly impossible for me to raise concerns without looking like a disgruntled ex-employee. They thought they had me cornered, but they'd overlooked something important. I still had access to the audit server. During my final days, while everyone thought I was quietly cleaning out my office, I'd set up an emergency admin account, a standard practice for system transitions that no one had bothered to check. It wouldn't last forever, but it might be enough. That night, I used my emergency credentials to access Sterling's audit server. I suspected they'd eventually discover and remove the account, so I worked efficiently, following the money trails I'd already identified. What I found made my earlier suspicions seem quaint by comparison. Peak Innovations wasn't just one holding company. It was a hub and a network of shell entities, all interconnected through a maze of transactions designed to hide their relationship. Some dated back to before Alexander even joined Sterling, suggesting this wasn't an opportunistic theft. It was a planned infiltration. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Alexander hadn't been hired despite his mediocre track record. He'd been installed. His previous company, the tech startup with more hype than substance, had been bankrolled by the same investment group that had recently gained 3 seats on Sterling's board, including the seat held by Robert Stevens' nephew, Daniel, who joined 7 months ago. This wasn't just an executive skimming from the company. This was a coordinated attack on Sterling itself, a slow-motion asset strip disguised as modernization. I downloaded everything I could find, organizing it meticulously. By dawn, I had traced over $15 million that had been siphoned from various departments through falsified supplier contracts, inflated service agreements, and phantom consultancy fees. Exhausted, I made coffee and sat on my back porch, watching the sun rise over the Detroit River. Margaret and I had bought this house for the view. Water calms your overthinking brain, she'd said. Now, I let the river's steady flow organize my thoughts. My initial instinct, to quietly alert the board, had been naive. This went deeper than Alexander and Lucas. Some board members were likely complicit, which explained why they'd been so eager to replace Victoria with an outsider when she retired. I needed to be smarter about this, more strategic. I spent the morning mapping connections between board members, Alexander's previous associates, and the shell companies. By afternoon, I'd identified 3 board members who were likely unaware of the scheme. Linda Johnson, a former operations executive, who joined the board after retiring from a competitor, Michael Chen, who represented our workers' union, and Samuel Davis, our oldest board member, who rarely spoke but never missed a vote. I also discovered something I'd overlooked. Lucas Miller had worked at Apex Logistics, one of the shell suppliers, 4 years ago. His name was buried in their incorporation documents as a founding partner, though he'd been removed from public-facing materials before being hired at Sterling. As I compiled this information, my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. "Is this Thomas Hartley?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking." "My name is Rebecca Clark. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division." My heart stopped momentarily. "We've received an anonymous tip about potential operational improprieties at Sterling Industries, involving its new leadership team. The information provided suggested you might have relevant knowledge." I chose my words carefully. I recently left my position as COO, after 18 years. "Yes, we're aware." Would you be willing to meet informally to discuss certain transactions that occurred over the past 7 months? Who else knows you're calling me? I asked. No one outside my immediate team. This is preliminary fact-finding, not a formal investigation yet. I considered my options. Going to the FBI directly would make this very public, very quickly. Sterling stock would plummet. Thousands of employees, people like Emily and James, could be affected if the company collapsed under a scandal. But someone had already tipped off the FBI. The clock was ticking. I'll need some time, I said. Finally. Time for what, Mr. Hartley? To make sure I get this right. I gave myself 3 days to execute my plan. First, I needed to ensure the evidence couldn't be erased. I copied all my documentation to multiple secure locations and set up dead man switches. If I didn't enter a code every 48 hours, the full package would automatically send to the FBI, the Department of Justice, and 3 investigative journalists I respected. Next, I carefully drafted emails to the 3 board members I believed were uninvolved: Linda, Michael, and Samuel. I didn't accuse anyone directly. Instead, I framed it as concerning patterns I noticed before my departure and included just enough evidence to raise serious questions without overwhelming them with details. I scheduled these to send automatically in 2 days. The most delicate part came next. I contacted Emily, asking if she could meet me for coffee. She agreed immediately. They're gutting your whole department. She told me when we met, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas says we're consolidating operational functions, but half the team has gotten reassignment notices, and the other half is being reviewed. Including you. She nodded, blinking back tears. 5 years at Sterling, and suddenly I'm told my position is redundant. I've got 6 weeks to find another role internally. Or I waited while she composed herself. Emily, do you remember that audit protocol we established after the Davis merger? The one with the separate verification pathway? She frowned, then understanding dawned. The parallel audit trail, the one that automatically duplicates all transactions over $50,000 to the secure server. Is it still running? As far as I know, it's hard-coded into the system. Lucas's team would have to specifically know about it to disable it. I nodded, relief washing over me. And who has access to those records now? Just the senior auditing team. And I guess Lucas, since he's COO. What about the backup archiving? Is that still sent to Iron Mountain on the 1st of each month? She thought for a moment. Yes, that's automated too. The October backup would have gone out last week. Perfect. Even if Alexander and Lucas discovered what I was doing and tried to alter the records, the originals would already be safely preserved off-site. Emily, I'm going to ask you something important, and you can absolutely say no. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside is a formal letter detailing specific operational concerns that, as a senior logistics manager, you're obligated to report to internal audit. It references only information you would have legitimate access to in your role. If you submit this, they legally cannot retaliate against you without triggering whistleblower protections. Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. Is this why they're really pushing me out? Because I might notice these things? Probably. And if you submit this, it creates an official internal record that can't be ignored. It forces internal audit to investigate specific transactions, the same ones I've documented elsewhere. Emily squared her shoulders. When? Tomorrow morning would be ideal. On my way home, I made 2 more stops. First to a notary public where I signed and authenticated a detailed affidavit about everything I'd discovered. Then to my lawyer's office where I left sealed instructions to be opened if anything happened to me. That evening I received a text message from James, while asking lots of questions about old audit protocols. Seems nervous. Watch yourself. They were starting to realize their mistake. They'd been so focused on pushing me out that they'd overlooked what I might have already documented. The pieces were in place. Now I just had to wait. 6 weeks after my departure, everything detonated simultaneously. The internal audit triggered by Emily's formal complaint reached Lucas's desk the same morning that my detailed emails reached the 3 uninvolved board members. By noon, Linda Johnson had called an emergency board meeting using her authority as audit committee chair. I wasn't there, but Emily texted me updates throughout the day. Board meeting started at 2. Alexander looking pale. Les just got escorted to a conference room with legal. Outside auditors arrived, taking over main conference room. By evening, the news had broken internally. Sterling was under investigation for operational irregularities. All executives who had joined under Alexander's tenure were placed on administrative leave pending a full forensic audit. I turned off my phone and took a long walk along the river, watching the Detroit skyline light up as darkness fell. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. The next morning, I received 3 missed calls from Robert Stevens, from Alexander, and from Daniel Stevens. I ignored them all. Instead, I answered a call from Samuel Davis, our oldest board member.
10 years of clean operations, he said,
his voice gravelly with age. No scandals, no restatements, no missed filings. I should have spoken up when they pushed you out.
You're speaking up now, Samuel. That's what matters.
The board has appointed me acting chairman while we sort through this mess. Robert and Daniel have resigned, along with 2 others. We've terminated Alexander and Lucas for cause. I said nothing. We'd like you to come back, Thomas, just temporarily, to help the forensic team and stabilize things. I watched a barge slowly making its way down the Detroit River, steady and purposeful. I'll help with the investigation, I said finally. But I won't be coming back permanently. May I ask why? Because Sterling needs someone who can innovate, I said, allowing myself a small smile. I'm just a little too traditional. 3 months later, I sat on my new deck in Traverse City, Michigan, watching the sun set behind the Grand Traverse Bay. My cabin wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms and an office, but the view made up for it. The investigation at Sterling had uncovered exactly what I'd suspected, a coordinated scheme to extract value through fraudulent contracts and artificial costs. Alexander, Lucas, and several board members now faced federal charges for securities fraud and embezzlement. I'd spent 6 weeks helping the forensic accountants unravel everything, then packed up my Detroit house and headed for the lakes Margaret and I had always talked about retiring to. The settlement Sterling offered for my consulting services during the investigation was generous, enough to buy this cabin outright, and still have plenty left over. I'd been clear with them. No public statements, no press conferences, no dramatic returns. That wasn't my style. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Got the promotion to director of logistics. The new CEO wants to rebuild the department properly. I smiled and typed back, well deserved. Always keep a parallel audit trail. My lawyer had called yesterday with news that the FBI was closing its case against Sterling, after the company agreed to governance reforms and financial penalties that pointedly excluded punishment for shareholders and regular employees. The right outcome is darkness settled over the bay. I opened the engraved pen Margaret had given me years ago. Inside was the last photo we'd taken together at the lake house the summer before her diagnosis. You were right, I said to her, smiling face. I should have made more time for views like this. Tomorrow, I'd drive into town and meet with the director of a local nonprofit who needed help organizing their operations. Nothing flashy, just good, clean operations for people doing important work. Some might call that old school. I just called it integrity.